We want to look at a couple different places today, one in the city of Port Huron and one outside the city. The one in the city, everyone wanted to go to. The one outside the city, no one wanted to go to. The one outside the city was located in Gables, Michigan. But their residents, quite a few of them, probably the majority of them, came from Port Huron. This place was called the County Poor Farm, but most people just called it the poorhouse. The caption on this photograph that was in the newspaper says this: Poorhouse. If you lived in St. Clair County a century ago and were heading to the poorhouse, this is where you wound up, the St. Clair County Poorhouse at Gables. The site was near the county fairgrounds. I remember as a boy when relatives would come over and all the adults were talking, and someone would say, well, you got to do this or that, or else we're going to end up in the poorhouse. And that was the first time I heard that, and I've heard it several times since when I was a boy, when they were talking. One time I heard poor farm. I thought, oh, well, I think I'd rather go to a poor farm than a poor house, but then I found out later it was the same thing. I also heard the word pauper used. I don't know, or I don't remember in what context it was, but I know I didn't want to be one. Today, the term poorhouse would not be politically correct, but back then that was really the official name. Official enough to be used in the newspapers anyway, according to this 1901 article in the Port Huron paper. In this article, it states that a businessman took up the cause of getting an organ for the poorhouse, and obviously from the title, it made the inmates happy. I also told you that the poorhouse was referred to as a poor farm, and it was a working farm, and we'll get to that in a minute. This also said that many folks back then, when they were critiquing somebody's financial wisdom, they would use this verse: over the hill to the poorhouse, I'm trudging my weary way. Now, I never heard that growing up. Of course, I wasn't living in that era. I'm a very young man. But that saying came from a poem by Will Carleton, and it goes like this: over the hill to the poorhouse, I'm trudging my weary way. I, a woman of 70, and only a trifle gray. I, who am smart and chipper, for all the years I've told, as many another woman that's only half as old. Over the hill to the poorhouse, I can't quite make it clear. Over the hill to the poorhouse, and it seems so horrid queer. Many a step I've taken, a toiling to and fro, but this is a sort of journey I never thought to go. I told you that the poor farm was a working farm, and the residents that were able-bodied were put to work. And in this article that was in the newspaper, it gives all the expenses for the poor farm. And you can see that they grew many things, and they also have livestock. The poorhouse was first established in 1869 at Smith Creek. 4 years later, it was moved to new housing at Gables. There were several reasons that the poorhouse was even established. I mean, it was to take care of the unfortunate, but after the Civil War, there was a lot of men coming back from the Civil War that weren't mentally capable of working from the horrors of war, either through shell shock or some other problem that they had, disabilities where they couldn't actually get work. And so they went to the poorhouse. But there was also other reasons as well. In her column, Where the Wild Goose Flies, Dorothy Mitt says this: the county poorhouse as such existed in the days when Port Huron was a lumber town, and when logs filled Black River and Mills Creek, Pine River and Bell River, and when the hardy lumbermen rode the logs in spring drives. It existed in the days when Port Huron was a shipbuilding center, and when sailors on leave, along with the lumberjacks, frequented the numerous saloons on Old Butler Street and squandered their season's pay. It was inevitable that many finally had to seek shelter and food at the county poorhouse until lumbering operations started again and the boats began to move. In earlier years, the destitute lumberjack and the equally destitute sailor, and the latter, until not so many years ago, comprised a great part of the guest list at the poor farm. Their sojourn, however, being more or less temporary. In 1914, this couple here ran the poorhouse. How do we know this? Well, because their pictures were on the front page of the Times Herald. Why were the pictures on the front page? Well, let's look at this. Keeper of County Poorhouse and his wife, who did heroic work at scene of Blaze Sunday, February 23, 1914. The poorhouse burned down. County Poor Farm burns. 73 inmates are rescued. Pathetic scenes enacted. Paupers cry as they see place razed by flames. Temporary shelter is given them at church in Maccabee Hall. Rescue work is carried on without a hitch, and everything done to comfort the inmates. The main structure of the St. Clair County Poor Farm at Gables is today in ruins, and the 73 inmates are being cared for at the Maccabee Hall in the village. Fire broke out on the roof of the large building shortly before noon on Sunday, and the first intimation that Superintendent Cowles had of the impending danger was when a portion of the roof fell in. Within a few minutes, the top story of the main structure was a mass of fire, which later spread to the east and west wings. The inmates had just eaten their noon meal when the alarm was sounded and panic followed. Mrs. Cowles, with great presence of mind, informed the central girl at the Gables telephone exchange of the fire, and within a few seconds, the operator was notifying residents of the village and nearby farmers of the fire that was sweeping the county farm. Men and women flocked to the scene, and within a few minutes, the volunteer firefighting brigade was at work. One of the most pathetic pictures that can be imagined was presented as the 73 inmates gathered in terror-stricken groups on the snow-covered lawn in front of the burning structure. Little old men and women, some of them helpless, and all shivering with the intense cold, sobbed and wrung their hands in grief. Their home, the only home that they would ever know, was being destroyed, and angry flames leaped at them as though in mockery. Many of these inmates are but children in thought and action. As they watched the flames in their work of destruction, it was necessary to restrain them by force from dashing into the midst of the roaring furnace. A lady who had been at the home for the past 35 years did break away, yelling and crying that her baby was being burned up. She ran for the doorway of the burning building. Flames and smoke seemed to envelop her before she was caught and again dragged to safety. Her baby was a little old rag doll that she had cherished for years. It had been given to her by a friend. After being told that she would be given a new baby, the little old woman quieted down and was led away. In this personal photograph here, you can see the poor farm burning. And at the bottom here, it says County Farm Burning 1914. Some of these photos have been made available by Dennis Delore, so we're certainly glad to have them. A new building was built the very same year. It was a much nicer building. It was no longer called the Poorhouse or the Poor Farm. It would be called the St. Clair County Infirmary. Look at all these windows, so much light going into the building. And look at the porches. This must have been very enjoyable for the residents. Here's a photograph that was taken by Russell Sawyer on the other side of the windows, looking out. Looks to be very enjoyable. Although the building was built in 1914, the dedication wasn't held until 1915. And this is a photo taken at that dedication. In June of 1915, they had an open house, or perhaps I should say open picnic. The front page of the paper says, Gables Picnic is biggest event staged by county. New infirmary is inspected by many thousands. graduating exercises, grange meeting, and athletic events feature day. Over 600 autos on grounds. New home for county awards is credit to officers and citizens. The article goes on to say, the event accomplished more real good than can be measured in words, for not only cemented closure for relations of the city and county residents, for the infirmary, which today stands as a monument to the progressiveness of its people, is a model from which the entire state can pattern. Here's kind of a neat photograph. In this photo here, you get a little closer look at the infirmary. And then, of course, you have the two fellows standing out there by the car, and the dog is on the running board. In 1961, the classification of the building changed to state-approved medical facility with a 92-patient capacity. It then became the St. Clair County Medical Center, which you can see in this photograph here. This photograph was provided by Frank Fisk and Fred Miller II. In 1992, the St. Clair County Medical Center was closed, and in 1993, the 1915 building was demolished, leaving only the barn standing as the St. Clair County Farm Museum. The second place we want to look at today is a place that people wanted to go to, and that was a resort. This resort was the closest resort to the city of Port Huron, closer than even Lakeside. It was located on Edison Beach, Edison Beach being just north of the Lighthouse Beach. The hotel was located between Ballantyne Street and Lakeview Avenue, and the name of the hotel was the Four Gables. In addition to the hotel, there were 8 cottages on Edison Beach. And I know we think of cottages as being small, but these cottages were actually homes that could be rented out for the season. Today, this is what it looks like from the Google satellite map. And those 2 streets running up, the one on the left is Lakeview Avenue, and the one on the right is Ballantyne Street. The homes today are located at almost identical places. The homes, cottages and the hotel were located back in 1900. If you look in about the center of the picture, that 2-story building, that would have been where the hotel is. You can see there's 3 homes to the left of it and 3 homes to the right. That would have made up 6 cottages. And then as we scroll over here, there were 2 more cottages north of Ballantyne Street, and about where these 2 homes here are located. The Four Gables is owned by Ezra Carleton. The Carleton family actually lived in St. Clair, originally from New Hampshire. And Ezra attended the district school in St. Clair and also worked on his father's farm. But then he came to Port Huron to get his high school education. And after graduating, served as a clerk in the William Stewart hardware store. I found this amazing photograph from the newspaper, the archives of this hardware store. Now, I've never seen this picture before, and then I found out what was there later, and I was even more surprised. So let's just take a minute and look at this photograph. This store was on the west side of Military Street in the 900 block. Look at the front of the store there on the sidewalk. They got a lot of merchandise out there. It looks like they're having a sidewalk sale. And look at these large windows on the first floor. That would have been very unusual for that time period. This would have been back, probably 1867, 1870, right in there. And as we scroll up here, you can see the signage. It says hardware, stoves, and tinwares. And then above the windows, it's got W. Stewart. And at the very top, we've got white lead, oil, and ship chandlery. Basically, that's just a fancy way of saying we carry supplies and equipment for ships. But I'd like to have you pay close attention to the roof line here. You see that roof line, and then below it you see these brackets. I guess the official name is corbels, but there are several pair of brackets as it goes along the rooftop. I wanted you to look at that because I want you to look at this picture here, because this is a store that was there later. Sears Roebuck and Company. And that was the store they were in before they moved to Grand River and 4th Street. Ezra eventually became a partner of Stewart's, the firm being known as Carlton, Stewart and Company. Notice in this ad that it says refrigerator and not icebox, and yet it was cooled by a block of ice. Go figure. Besides his place in the community as a prominent hardware dealer, Ezra Carlton was mayor of Port Huron in 1881 and also represented us in Congress from 1883 to 1886. He was also mayor at the time the second great forest fire struck the Thumb District, and it was his work and guidance in relief work for which he was particularly noted. Dorothy Metz said in one of her columns, when the first indication of the disaster reached Port Huron, Mayor Carlton immediately formed a relief committee, consisting, among others, Omar Conger, the senator. Petitions were sent to Governor Jerome to issue a proclamation and an appeal to the whole country for aid, and the mayor also sent out appeals, which were published in many newspapers throughout the United States. In all, cash and supplies worth nearly $500,000 were donated through Mayor Carlton's efforts and that of the Relief Committee. Keep in mind, $500,000 back then would be worth about $15 to $16 million today. It's also interesting to recall that it was Clara Barton's intervention in behalf of the fire victims, which was the real beginning of the Red Cross in the United States. The photo you've been looking at is a photograph of the old Opera House, and this was actually the Relief Committee headquarters for the Thumb Forest victims of 1881. And in this photo, you can see that they're loading down a wagon on the right-hand side, actually a couple wagons there. And the caption on this reads, that buggy on the far left, that's Omar Conger and his wife. Of course, you couldn't prove it by me, I can barely see him, but that's what the caption says. Also, the black bunting draped across the building is in mourning for the assassinated President Garfield, who had just died of gunshot wounds. We have 3 photographs. We can take a look at the 4 Gables. All of them were taken from the beach side and not the Conger Street side. And in this photograph here, you can see there's several ladies standing out in front of the porch. And it looks like there's a couple of fellows sitting on the porch. And in this photograph, it looks like Crazy Hat Day. Everyone seems to be wearing a hat of some sort. And as we go over here to the left, you can see Mr. Carlton standing on the beach with his white shirt and hat on. And behind that, you can see part of the dance pavilion that went along with the Four Gables Hotel. This one is quite a clear photograph, and it looks like some of the folks are out there on the water on a raft having some fun. And as we go back here to the beach side, you can see that there's quite a few people on the porch watching them. And above them, you can also see the signage that says Four Gables. In this ad that Mr. Carlton put in the paper for Four Gables, it says this: this man has just taken our order to furnish the Four Gables with fresh fish during the summer. Our guests will be served with the same cooked to perfection at all meals after June 15th, at which time one new dancing pavilion will also be open. We have 2 or 3 desirable cottages left for those who prefer them to living in the hotel. Please remember that this hotel is for comfort, and it is the aim of the management to make all the guests feel at home and have a good time. Boating, fishing, bathing, and dancing are some of the amusements we can offer. And they weren't just limited to those amusements. Such things as card games and regular games were played, and in the newspaper they had a particular section, the gossip of the beaches. Some of the papers actually said gossip of the beaches. This one just says the beaches, and gives a different resource and what was happening in them. And where you see Four Gables, they tell all the people that have come into the hotel and the cottages and where they're from. You also tell whatever folks from Port Huron were at Four Gables as well. And then they go on to say this. A sheet and pillowcase fight was a feature of the week at the Four Gables. It was largely attended. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never heard of a sheet and pillowcase fight. So I Googled it. Not much there. But it was a game that helped folks there find out who the newcomers were and find out something about them. How they did it, I have no idea. But it was played at school parties in the early 1900s quite a bit to get to know the new kids. I did find this illustration of a sheet and pillowcase party. The little card on the side says, "The pleasure of your company is requested at the sheet and pillowcase party. Bring sheet and pillowcase." I guess that's a given. But anyway, it shows a picture of the folks. And not only did they have the sheets and pillowcases, but it looks like they also wore a mask. And as we scroll down here, at the very end, in the last illustration, it shows they took their mask off and dropped their hood, and how everybody got acquainted. So I sure would like to know exactly how that one worked. Here's a photograph of Mr. Carlton and his wife and their only child, their daughter, Edith Jenny. At some point, Mr. Carlton retired, and their daughter, along with her husband that you see here, took over the business. The hotel and dance hall were put up for sale in 1921. I'm not sure who bought it, but the hotel did go on for a few years after that. And eventually it was torn down and homes were built in its place. And probably those homes were torn down and new ones were put in their place. I mean, that was a long time ago. And those homes that we saw in the Google satellite images look pretty new. I have a postcard I'd like to show you of Edison Beach that was taken in the wintertime. There's no extra charge for this one, but I thought you might enjoy seeing it. These fellows here standing up there, and you can see the caption says Edison Beach. I'm sure the folks that live in these houses on Edison Beach now enjoy it very much. But at one time, a whole different generation enjoyed the beach, I think, even more.